Lesson 22, Section 4, Gettysburg, a turning point. While neither side won the Battle of Antietam, it was enough of a victory for Lincoln to take his first steps toward ending slavery. When the Civil War began, Lincoln had resisted pleas from abolitionists to make emancipation, or the freeing of slaves, a reason for fighting the Confederacy. He himself opposed slavery, but the purpose of the war, he said, is to save the Union, and is not either to save or destroy slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation. As the war dragged on, Lincoln changed his mind and decided to make abolition a goal of the Union. Lincoln realized that European nations that opposed slavery would never support the side that wanted slavery to continue. Freeing slaves could also deprive the Confederacy of a large part of its workforce. On January 1st, 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. The proclamation, or formal order, declared slaves in all Confederate states to be free. This announcement had little immediate effect on slavery. The Confederate states ignored the document, and slaves living in states loyal to the Union were not affected by the proclamation. Still, for many in the North, the Emancipation Proclamation changed the war into a crusade for freedom. The Declaration of Independence had said that all men are created equal, and now the fight was about living up to those words. The Battle of Gettysburg. In the summer of 1863, Lee felt confident enough to risk another invasion of the North. He hoped to capture a northern city and help convince the weary North to seek peace. Union and Confederate troops met on July 1st, 1863, west of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The Union troops, about 90,000 strong, were led by newly appointed General George C. Meade. After a brief skirmish, they occupied 4 miles of high ground along an area known as Cemetery Ridge. About a mile to the west, some 75,000 Confederate troops gathered behind Seminary Ridge. The following day, the Confederates attempted to find weak spots in the Union position, but the Union lines held firm. On the third day, Lee ordered an all-out attack on the center of the Union line. Cannons filled the air with smoke and thunder. George Pickett led 15,000 Confederate soldiers in a charge across the low ground, separating the two forces. Pickett's charge marked the northernmost point reached by Southern troops during the war. However, as Confederate troops pressed forward, Union gunners opened great holes in their advancing lines. Those men who managed to make their way to Cemetery Ridge were struck down by Union soldiers in hand-to-hand combat. Although Gettysburg was a victory for the Union, the losses on both sides were staggering. More than 17,500 Union soldiers and 23,000 Confederate troops were killed or wounded in 3 days of battle. Lee, who lost about a third of his army, withdrew to Virginia. From this point on, he would only wage a defensive war on Southern soil. Opposition on the Union home front. Despite the victory at Gettysburg, Lincoln faced a number of problems on the home front, including opposition to the war itself. A group of Northern Democrats were more interested in restoring peace than in saving the Union or ending slavery. Republicans called these Democrats Copperheads, after a poisonous snake with that name. Other Northerners opposed the war because they were sympathetic to the Confederate cause. When a pro-slavery mob attacked Union soldiers marching through Maryland, Lincoln sent in troops to maintain order. He also used his constitutional power to temporarily suspend the right of habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is the right of an accused person to appear in court so a judge can determine whether he or she is being imprisoned lawfully. During the national emergency, citizens no longer had the right to appear before a court to face charges, and people who were suspected of disloyalty were jailed without being charged for a crime. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. In 1863, President Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg. Thousands of the men who died there had been buried in a new cemetery. Lincoln was among those invited to speak at the dedication of this new burial ground. The nation would never forget Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. The president deliberately spoke of the war in words that echoed the Declaration of Independence. The great Civil War, he said, was testing whether a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal can long endure. He spoke of the brave men, living and dead, who had fought to defend that ideal. The world can never forget what they did here. Finally, he called on Americans to remain dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.